Hi, this is Doug from 10-Minute Amiga Retrocast, and welcome to another episode of the ChickenHead Chronicles. This week, a sad story indeed. I broke one of my Commodore 64s. Some of you may have seen it on Twitter, what happened. In a nutshell, I was talking to some of the guys about Jim Drew's new Commodore keyboard that he is doing his Kickstarter for, and he's absolutely made his minimum on Kickstarter and really done well. I'll put a link to it down here, and you'll also find that in the description. But one of the guys and I online were talking about which keyboards we had on our Commodore 64s. So I went into my office, into my studio, to look at one of my Commodore 64s to see which model I had. And this, I swear, this is exactly what happened. Well, here is my lovely little Commodore 64. I want to check and see what keyboard this one has. Hey, Ataris! How are you guys doing? Why are you looking at me like that? Okay. Well, let me just casually grab this Commodore 64 out of the case. What the? What are you guys doing? No! Really, honest, it is, it's true. So, it smashed up the case when it hit the tile floor. And this is the actual case right here. You can see in the corner, it took out a big, huge chunk right here. And then right here, big, huge chunk where the user port is and the dataset port is, just gone. This piece I could find, it was right there on the floor. This piece, I searched for 30 minutes in my studio. Got no idea where it went. I'm starting to think maybe it was never there. Maybe when I got this case, it was broken to begin with. Just a brief story. This computer was one that I bought off of eBay a year ago, I would say. When it got here, the package was smashed. The entire top of the computer just smashed in, just crushed. And the machine was okay, except it broke the entire top of the case. So what I did is I borrowed part of my old case from my original Commodore 64 from 1985 or 1984 when I was a kid, and I put that top of the case on there. And that's what got me thinking maybe this piece was already broken. Maybe that broke in shipping too and somehow missed catching that. But with this bottom of the part of the case damaged like this, I started looking at the bottom of my original C64 case, and it was a different color. Here's some pictures here. One of them was the brownish color. The other was what we'd consider the light grayish color. Be fine, who cares? It's just a Commodore 64. We're just going to be playing some games on it. But I thought, well, we want it to look cool. So I started getting some ideas about what to do and decided to put the mismatched parts together and then clean it up and paint the actual case and get something cool out of it. So this is the story of what I did. So this is the Commodore 64 that's been damaged. You can see when I accidentally dropped it, it's got a big crack right down here. It lost a piece right here in the center between the function keys and the main keyboard, just broke right off. And then down here, we've got a big chunk taken out of the side right here. And I've got the piece for that. Now this other damage right back here, these parts I cannot find, and I think it was already broken off because I've been unable to locate it, and this is a conglomeration of two different cases. So what I'm going to do is take it apart, clean the entire thing, and repair it as much as possible. And I'm also going to see if I have a different bottom section from one of my old C64s that I can just replace it so I don't have to worry about this. So here's an interesting conundrum. I've got my spare 64 that I just used for parts, and it does have a bottom half that is in substantially better shape than this one. But look at the color differences. This is one of them that's almost the grayish, and this is one of them that's the beigeish, and that is just going to look funny if I put the two of them together. This damage to the top part, fairly severe there, but I think I'm going to be able to repair that just fine and put the piece back on here. But first I'm going to very carefully clean this top half, and I am going to take the bottom half off of this other C64, and then I think we're going to paint them. Now for cleaning these little guys, I like to use just hot soapy water and one of these magic eraser sponges. I find that these work about best for getting all the little smudges and goop off of your either C64 or Amiga cases. Just make sure there's no delicate electronics still attached to it. Then I'll take a toothbrush and I'll clean up these fine areas here in the grill. So here's the final result of the first repair of the bottom of the case. I used the glue that I mentioned a few minutes ago, and I let it set for a couple of hours, and it seems perfectly good. It looks very nice, and the case itself, the bottom case, looks just fine. But when you compare it with the top of the case, you can see quite a discrepancy in the colors there, which we don't want to live with. So while this would absolutely work just fine to repair the machine, it just looks a little bit wonky like this. So what we're going to do is we're going to paint this little beauty. We're going to prime it. We're going to get some nice paint for it, and we're going to beautify this little guy so the top and the bottom matches. Now here's another little issue that I've discovered. The bottom of this motherboard, all of the motherboard mounts are broken. They've probably been broken for years, for all I know, but every single one of them is either broken or gone completely. So what do? Well, we get in touch with our friend Jeff Birt from the Ozark Mountains in beautiful North America, and we look at one of his case saver repair kits that you can get for your Commodore 64 case. He sells several different models for several different types of cases. These particular pieces are designed to go right down here. You just trim these down with a tool and glue those right in place, and he's got a little drill head there so you can line everything up just perfectly. Glue them in place, and then your screws go right into here, which is absolutely delightful. Then, if you have any broken posts, like this style of post here, and along here, and mine are actually in pretty good condition, he does have repair parts for those too, where you can actually put a little sleeve over the top there to repair those. And lastly, one broken part that I do have is right here, this little clip. These clips are fine over here, but this clip is broken. So he's provided replacement clips that actually just can slide over the top. Now in this case, it looks like I don't have the right size of clip, so I'll have to do something about that. Nope, I do. Yep, here it is. I've got the right size of clip right there. Slides down inside there, which I'll show you in a few minutes, and glue it in place, maybe trim it down a little bit, and it actually replaces these broken components. Pretty darn cool. For the time being, I'm going to get this glued back together though. So we have this little guy all cleaned up now. She's looking pretty good. I got some lithium grease off there that doesn't need to be there. We're going to put some heat sinks on it in a few minutes. But I remember this is the one I bought off eBay that had a bad 6510 processor. One of the pins was actually missing from it, so it wouldn't boot when I got it. So I took a little pin, I don't know if you can see it there, and I put it right down in there, and I think I put a little solder on it too, and made connection, and it's been working perfect ever since with this 6510 that came with it. So now I've got her plugged in to my Atom power supply from CommodoreForever.net. Let's see, give her some power, and we'll see if we get an image. Hey, that looks pretty darn good. We've got no keyboard, so we can't do anything, but she comes right back up just like she's supposed to. Looking good. Now I also have this nice 64 dead test cartridge. Now it's not dead, so obviously I don't need to use this, but this is going to run some tests on it, and we can take a look and make sure everything, all the tests will pass. Of course, some will fail because it doesn't have the harness, but that's just a fact of life. Let's get this plugged in. We'll test her out. Okay, I've got the cartridge installed. We'll boot her up. Takes a minute to get a response, but we'll see what we get. Okay, that looks good so far. Testing the 0 page, testing the stack, testing the screen RAM. Screen RAM looks okay. Checking photo now. SID test sounds pretty good so far. Looks good. Passed everything. So that's all fine and good that we test out with a dead test cartridge, but let's do a real test. Let's get a look at Misfits Miss Rodman from the future was 8-bit. Make sure the cartridge slot's working okay. Sound is coming through just fine. Make sure the joystick responds. Oh yeah. Beautiful. If you don't have this game, get this game. And I heard the other day on Pixel Gaiden, Sanxion said that they're coming out with a cartridge that's going to have both Miss Rodman and Rodman on the same cartridge. So that is going to be pretty cool. So I picked up this cool little heatsink kit off of Amazon that has all kinds of little tiny and mid-sized heatsinks. Now on a Commodore 64, the VIC chip tends to get a little bit warm. 6510 gets a little bit warm. SID maybe gets a little bit warm. Those are the main chips that we want to keep cool. But what I'm going to do is take a look at the original metal shielding that was in the past used as a heatsink. And it looks like it would heat sink the SID, the 6510, these 3 ROM chips, and this little guy right here, which is the 906114 chip right here. That looks like that was heat sinked. So I'm going to just heat sink all those. Okay, so we've got a heat sink on the VIC-2, on the SID, the processor, and the 3 ROM chips. Now I'm using one heat sink just in the middle of each of them because that's where the die is right in the middle of them. Oops, I missed one right there. Some small ones in the ROM chips. They generally, if they're working okay, don't get too awful hot, but I used the little bigger ones on some of these other chips. We've given the motherboard itself a good thorough cleaning. Now the keyboard, I've tested every key and they're working pretty good, and it's actually fairly clean looking in the overall scheme of things. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and give this keyboard a good blowing out with my high pressure air compressor, and then I'm just going to give it a good manual thorough cleaning. I don't think I'm going to pop the keys off because it really does seem to be pretty neat and tidy inside of here. Whoever previously owned this took good care of it. I will not torture you with the sound of my air compressor, so I'll be back in a few minutes when it's clean. Now here I've got my Jan Beta approved alcohol spritzer. I love how he's always spritzing things on his motherboard, so I got a little spritzer for my alcohol too. We'll just give this thing a little spray. Should be perfectly safe because it dries so quickly. And we'll just give the whole keyboard just a nice, thorough little clean inside and out with a toothbrush. Now here on the bottom cover, if you recall, I nipped off all of the little buds here. And what I did is I picked up a couple of sanding sponges, and I got them from medium, coarse, and fine grit. So I'm going to start out with a little coarser grit and then work onto a fine grit to kind of even that out a little bit, make it so when we glue it on, it's going to glue on nicely. Using that little sanding block, it seemed to work pretty good. These are all fairly smooth, fairly down to the surface. Now what I'll do is I'll go out and I'll blow these out with my air compressor and then wipe everything down with alcohol to get all the little ABS plastic dust off of here. But I also want to look at what we've accomplished here with our top cover. You see, I've got this glued in place here. It seems quite sturdy. You can see a little visible line where it was cracked, but it's intact and everything seems very, very sturdy with this glue I'm using. There's a little bit of glue on the surface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little bit of that fine end of the new sanding block I got to just get that glue off. And again, I'm not too worried about it because this whole thing's going to be painted anyway, so I don't think you're going to see anything, but I just want to make sure it's a nice smooth surface. So I'll sand that down and then clean it up. For this, I'm using a finer sanding block. The first one I used was coarse because it was on the inside of the case, but here I'm going to use a little finer sand block in order to just be a little bit more gentle with the glue here. To be honest, considering what the case looked like at the outset with a huge crack here, this whole piece missing, it really did not repair too bad at all. And with the bottom case replaced, I mean, the color is definitely different. I could just put it together like this and I think I'd be perfectly happy and perfectly able to sell this or whatever I wanted to, but we're going to go ahead and still paint it. But next we are going to put Jeff Birt's repair kit pieces inside of here. So I'm going to go ahead and clean this up with alcohol and we're going to start gluing. Now here's the cool thing about Jeff's repair kit. It comes with a little screwdriver, it's a nice little drill bit that is perfectly sized for the Commodore holes. And this thing provides two distinct purposes. One of them is to line things up. So you can put your screwdriver or your drill bit in there, line it up right with the hole, and then when you glue it in, you know exactly that it's going into the right spot. That saves you from having to break your neck and look and try and line up the little holes. So that's cool. Second, once you glue it in there, if you use something like epoxy, now again, I'm using my special plastic variation of super glue. I'm experimenting with that. But if you use epoxy and some of it gets smooshed up in there and dries and your screw hole won't get in, you have the perfect size drill bit just to very, very carefully drill it out, drill the epoxy out, and get the hole cleared up and ready to go. I don't think I'm going to have the issue because I'm going to just try to keep the glue around the outside perimeter, so hopefully it won't get in the hole. But I'm going to go ahead and get started. Again, what I have here, I have this rapid fuse primer. You put this on where you're going to be gluing and then let it sit for a minute or so and it primes it up. So I'm going to prime 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different spots here. And I'm going to prime it both on the disc and on the case itself. Let me get started. Now that I have it all primed, I'll use my little rapid fuse all-purpose adhesive, put just a couple little dabs on the back of each little nugget here, and then use the drill bit to align them and get them set in. Be back in a minute. And now we have 7 fancy new little nuggets for our screws on our motherboard to dig right into. I'm going to give this a couple of hours to dry. It'll probably dry in 5 or 10 minutes, but I'll give it a couple of hours to let it dry and make sure it's nice and firm, and I'll test these, make sure they're all nicely in place. Now, onto these clips here. These clips here, of course, snap into the back of the case to hold everything together. You see, this one and this one are both still intact and in fine shape, but this one is broken. So I'm going to do the same thing. I want to level this little guy out. I'm going to use my nippers. Who knows exactly where that plastic is shooting across the room too, but just to get it nice and level. There. And this little guy, she will fit right down into this groove. And you want to make sure it's an equal level to these. This one happens to be. That was my joystick falling. And now I'll just glue this into place. Now that I know that it's the right height, I don't need to trim anything off. I'll just glue this right into place, and it will actually replace that broken piece. See how attractive that is? That's pretty cool, isn't it? I think Jeff did a really cool job of designing these. We'll just get a little primer in place and a little glue, and I'll be right back with that. Now we've given the primer a chance to dry a little bit, and I'm just going to apply some glue to my little piece right here. Make sure she's not ever going to go anywhere. And then she'll just slide right down into the groove. This is how C64 got her groove back. Let that dry. I'm going to let it dry again for an hour or two, just to make sure she's good and secure. One thing we want to be aware of is our nice little Commodore label, and that we do not want to paint over that. Now, while I could use some masking tape on it, I've seen some other people actually remove it with a little heat and then re-glue it on, and I think that's what I'm going to do. And I'll probably do the same thing for the power button over here, where it says power, and I'll do it for the label in the back. So I've got my trusty hairdryer, and I won't torture you with listening to the hairdryer, but I'm going to warm this label up and see if I can peel it off. If that doesn't work, then we'll do the masking. And happily, with a little bit of applied heat, our beautiful Commodore label, which is made of metal, comes right off. It's not even a sticker, it's an actual piece of metal. And I hope the rest of it comes off just as easily. Turns out the serial number sticker on the bottom is a lot fussier, and every time I try to manipulate it, it gets to the point where it feels like it's going to tear off. So I'm just going to mask that off with some tape. That shouldn't be any problem at all. Well, I wanted to come out and do some spray painting, but my chickens seem to think that it's dinner time instead, and so unless I want to spray paint my chickens, I think I'm going to have to move to the front yard to do this. Hi, girls. So what we're going to do is we're going to do this in a nice coat of silver paint, and then once it's all dry, we're going to finish it off with a nice clear glossy lacquer. Let's see how this comes out. This paint has primer built right into it, so in theory I didn't need to prime it first. You want to make sure you get all the little grains there? Bring as possible. I'm going to do a couple coats on here. Let it dry. And do a couple coats and make sure we get it covered. So I'm going to have to say, the paint job went pretty well. Let's take a look at the results. We have a nice metallic silver C64. Now, in a perfect world, I would have done things differently, but this is a learning experience. I would have been more careful right here with the glue. There's some glue that wouldn't sand off. It was just taking the plastic off and ignoring the glue. So you see the repair lines just a little bit more than I would like, but that's okay. I know this is a repair job, and I'll present it as a repair job if I end up selling it. It stayed nice and intact. It stayed nice and firm. There are some areas that I wish would have turned out better with the paint, where it's rolled down a little bit and gummed up a little bit with the paint, but not bad, not unattractive for the most part. But again, if I had life to do over again, maybe I'd do it a little different way. Next one, I'll paint it differently. The bottom came out just fine. No issues at all. My tape over the serial numbers is fine. I'm going to put some new rubber grommets on it. I end up taking those off before I painted it. But next, what we're going to do is we're going to put a clear lacquer on this little guy, which is just a glossy, clear coating of a specialized paint that's designed as a protectorant. Because I don't know if you've ever dealt with paint on a plastic before, but it's not that hard to get a fingernail under it and just chip it off and peel it off, even, you know, a year or so later. It's not too bad. This will give it a little extra level of protection. So we're going to go outside and we're going to paint that again with a clear lacquer. So this lacquer should have about a 20-minute touch dry time and about an hour before it's safe to handle, but they recommend 24 hours before you really do a lot with it. So let's try it in an inconspicuous area and see how it looks. Yeah, that's fine. It's perfectly clear. It's not leaving any residue on that paint in there. So I'm going to go ahead and give her a nice spray down. Ooh, smells terrible. Now for the bottom layer here, we'll do the same thing. And this should just give it a nice, clear, protective coating that'll help the paint from to resist chipping in the future without affecting the color that I chose for the paint. I hope you guys like the color. I think it's actually pretty cool. This is just wrong. Look at this. I wore my Amiga shirt today, and this is a ChickenHead Chronicles episode. What's wrong with me? So, we've got the final coat of the lacquer on there, the covering, and it's pretty much dry. I'm not, you know, still maybe just a tiny bit tacky, but it's pretty much dry. So now, we're going to put this little beauty back together and see what she looks like complete. And of course, we'll start with our nice bottom plate here with our nice new nubbins created by Jeff Birt from Hey Birt. Make sure you like and subscribe. Our nice, clean, and now heat-sinked motherboard. Now, I'm going to have to check and see if the keyboard's going to fit nicely with these two different heat sinks on here. I think it'll work okay. I've used them before. We'll just put this in place and we'll get everything lined up, and the screw holes fit just beautifully in every case. I'm seeing the screw holes fitting, but I am seeing on the bottom of the motherboard that I do have a piece of the old broken case here with the screw still in it. So let me go ahead and get that out. I put all the extra screws in a nice little bag here, so hopefully I have not lost any. Just bring all those little guys right out and start screwing away. Now, we'll just put these in here. Now I'm going to be quite gentle because I really don't want the glue to break and this to pop up. So I'm going to be quite gentle with these. So I noticed one thing when I first tried to screw down the motherboard, that the screws, even though they're the right ones, were a little bit tight, and it actually broke the glue, and I had to re-glue all of them. I had to re-glue this one down, and I decided to put a little extra glue around the side of all of them and let them dry for a while. Then I took the drill and the bit that Jeff Birt supplies, and I just gave a little bit of a drilling to each one, maybe just to open it up a little bit. Not much pressure at all. And then what I decided to do was take a screw from each one and just make a nice little starter twist here, so it doesn't put a whole lot of pressure on it when I'm doing it from the motherboard. Just do it till you feel a little resistance, and then unscrew it. And I'm going to do that to each one, so when I put the motherboard in, it can smoothly go in and smoothly tighten down. Now, I absolutely don't think it's any kind of defect with anything. I mean, these are ingenious. I think it's just because there's different kinds of screws that Commodore probably used that are maybe a little different size, different kinds of glue. Like I probably should have used epoxy instead of a plastic super glue type thing. That's a little bit more permanent, but live and learn. Now that we have all of our little screw holes loosened up a little bit, let's put the motherboard in. And everything lines up just fine. Now I'll once again try to very gently screw these in. Okay, with our screws in here in the bottom plate, now we're going to put the top on. But first we have to screw the keyboard back in, because of course that was unscrewed. So I'll just take care of getting this keyboard screwed back in, and we'll get this put back together. All right, we've got this keyboard screwed back in. That's nice and tight. Now we'll plug in our little LED light for power and our keyboard connector. Make sure we get all those holes lined up. It is keyed, at least on this model, so it only goes in one way. Now we'll test our new little connectors. Last of our plastic covering off here. Get our LED light back functional. Have to say, that makes for a pretty interesting looking Commodore 64. What do you guys think? Shall we see if she works? I haven't put the screws in the bottom yet. I'll do that later off camera. So now we're going to turn on this little silver beauty for the first time and see if she works. We've got a power light. Double-sided games. That looks pretty good. And we've got a nice game of Abbey de Mort. Run, little monk, run! Okay, so a couple things. First of all, I put the little rubber bumpers back on the bottom. I had some clear ones that I use in my 1541 drives, and that worked out just fine. Second is, these are two completely different top and bottom pieces, and it turns out on the back, one of the clips, like these, does not line up perfectly with the top of the case. It was off by about maybe quarter of an inch or so, and it wouldn't allow the case to close. So I had to take my nippers, and I just nipped a little piece off the plastic clip, and then it fit right in. Now, it's not the perfect solution, but it absolutely did work. Now, things that I would like, if I had it to do over again, I would paint it a little bit differently to try and avoid any kind of runs or smears, but it's really not bad. It looks pretty good unless you're really digging down deep into it. And like I said, I would be a little more careful with the gluing, but I think overall it looks pretty darn cool, and it works absolutely beautifully. I was able to test it with a lot of pieces of equipment. It works just great. I'd say overall, I'm fairly pleased with how it turned out. The other thing that I have to say about this machine is it has probably the clearest displays of any of my Commodore 64s. The jail bars on there are relatively non-existent, and I'm pretty darn impressed with how it looks. I'd also like to take this time to thank my wonderful patrons for helping support me, just like you can too, by following this link. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. I appreciate all the support, and every penny goes right back into the show one way or another. I appreciate it. My final thoughts. I don't know what I'm going to do with this. I actually kind of like it being silver, and I actually kind of like the quality of the display on it. Like I said, it's my best looking Commodore 64 as far as a display. I was thinking about selling it. I was thinking about giving it away as a raffle prize at the class event that's going to be sponsored by Robert Bernardo in late April in Los Angeles. I'll put the link to his website down below, and you'll find some of the details in the description. Or I may give something else away. I don't know. It's a pretty good looking machine. What do you guys think? Let me know down in the comments. But until next time, this is Doug from 10 Minute Amiga Retrocast, signing out.